Well, why don't we go ahead and do this? We are recording, so folks that want to rewatch and replay are certainly welcome to do that. We're talking about restarting business today in whatever form or format that looks like for you and your organization. But first, we just want to welcome you all. Thanks for taking a little bit of time to join us today to think about, reflect on what restarting business looks like for you and sort of your hemisphere of the world, if you will. We'll remind you there are a number of ways to engage with us throughout our conversation today. You can use the Q&A feature at any point in time to send questions directly to Rob and myself. Those are visible to everyone, and we will either choose kind of in that space to respond to your question. We also might also kind of voice your question out loud and answer it live as well. Sometimes they're just a little more complicated and need a little more nuance. So we might do that live as well. But the Q&A function and feature is open for your use throughout the webinar today. So feel free to engage with that as you see fit. We also have the chat feature, and the chat feature is best used in navigating questions, conversations, dialogue, resources, ideas, insights among all of the participants. So just make sure that as you use the chat function, that you toggle your blue button, if you will, away from just the panelists to all panelists and attendees. It'll be a great opportunity to engage with your fellow participants throughout a conversation, and I'll remind you about that as we go. So with that, just a couple of introductions to get us started today. For those I've not yet had the opportunity to meet, my name is Aaron Wolowick. I'm the CEO of EventGuard, and I'll be playing the role of moderator on today's conversation, more or less. I've had Rob sort of fill in a lot of his insights, thoughts, considerations in restarting business. I'll chime in as appropriate and also tell us all a little bit later on in the program ways to get involved in meetings and events specifically if that's of interest to you. So I think one of the things that I'm excited about today is I feel, Rob, as though we sort of have a little bit of an inside track, not that it's going to be the same in everyone's neighborhood and under every business condition, but having sort of my knowledge and expertise in the meetings and event space, working on the coalition, and certainly the work that you've been doing behind the scenes and thinking about business specifically, I think we've pulled together a number of interesting insights and lots of things to think about and consider as we move throughout our content today. So with that, I'll turn it over to you for your introduction as well.
Sure, and totally agree. Hello, everyone. My name's Rob McCarty. I'm the managing partner and CEO of the Image Shop, brand marketing firm here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. As Aaron alluded to, I've been working in and out of several different groups, whether that be within the city of Grand Rapids, downtown Grand Rapids, Inc., working through West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum, and then also a few things that are at the state government level. And it is really interesting, Aaron, because I think when you talk about some of the overlays, especially when you talk about consumer-facing businesses where people come to businesses, a lot of what you and the work that you guys are doing and learning about for events and meeting space is very applicable to what you do in retail, service, and others. So I think it's a good match.
Awesome. Great. So with that, we'll turn the floor over to everyone else as well. We'd love to know who we have joining us today and kind of where your knowledge and experience comes from. So if you might be willing to introduce yourselves, that would be great. You can do that in a single chat in the chat box, starting with your name, your role, again, whether that's something formal like your title or informal. We're happy either way. Over the course of the series that we launched throughout the month of April, I think I introduced myself 4 or 5 different ways over the course of that span of time. I think that included gardener, calligrapher, and the list goes on. So whatever you're feeling like today, we'd love to know your organization and maybe a question. So if you have a specific question that you're hoping to have answered today, we would love to know at the top so we can try to cover that for you. So again, would love for your name, your role, your organization, and a question that you hope to have answered. You know, it's interesting, Rob. I'll just kind of waffle here for a moment on the question that I hope to have answered. I was working with a colleague this morning, writing marketing copy for an upcoming event. It's a virtual event that's helping people kind of think about their in-person events. And the sort of the thing that I found most interesting in writing this copy is that I think people are wanting to say, we're wanting to imagine that this reopening is kind of a finite thing. Like it's, there's a plan. We're going to reopen, and then we're going to be done. And kind of what I reminded this copywriter was that I actually don't think that that's the case at all. I actually imagine that over the course of the next several weeks and months, that there will be sort of an iterative process where what we sort of think about and launch tomorrow, next week, next month might not look like how we have to shift and morph and change even in 30 days from that, or in 60 days from that, or in 90 days from that. And so I keep thinking about this sort of reopening as an iterative process that we have to constantly gather feedback from our customers. We have to constantly evaluate how things are going with our staff and with our key stakeholders, and then make informed decisions about making changes around those things. I'm curious kind of your thoughts around that, and if you have other sort of questions that are percolating in your mind as you sort of pulled the content together for today's conversation.
Yeah, I mean, for one, I completely agree with that assessment. I mean, that is, I think every organization that I've been serving in this timeline, all the guidance that's coming kind of top down, and even from like the really strong business leaders that I work with, they're right where you are. And so I do think there's a disconnect currently between potentially reality and this, oh, it's just going to be fine. Yeah. And I think we all are going to have to work really hard, for one, to make sure that everybody feels that they're able to participate and be comfortable and safe. There's a lot of psychology, which I'm not a psychologist, but we do work a lot within marketing psychology, and there's a lot of psychology that's going to affect this reopening as well. So there's lots to think about. For me, I'm really curious, on what you had to talk about, honestly, because I think understanding how events where so many people and so many organizations, including where I'm at with DGRI, I mean, the city of Grand Rapids thrives on events and large-scale events, conferences, et cetera, to fuel our downtown. So I'm very interested in that as I'm involved in those conversations as well.
Awesome. Let me just say hello to a few folks. We have Natalie joining us from the Image Shop. She is the face behind the follow-up blog post, if you will, and we appreciate all of her help in pulling together the outlines as well as the PowerPoint slide decks for our presentations and our ongoing series. We have Whitney from the Michigan Association of School Boards. Welcome. We have Stacy from Conference Direct. Hi, Stacy. John Sagoda from the National Association for Gifted Children. Dawn's joining us from Synergy Forces. Welcome, Dawn. Anita is here as well from MPHI. So welcome, Anita, and the whole crew. We also have Debbie Kopkow from Michigan, school business officials. So welcome to all of you. And I know that you have sort of a range of interests around this topic, and there seem to be a million of these type of presentations happening right now. And so we hope that we're going to provide you some information maybe that you're not gathering elsewhere. So with that, I'll just have you, Rob, just remind us a little bit about the series, and then I'll launch into the agenda for today.
Yep, just to be mindful, if, again, Aaron said it, but if you want to see this replayed or there's information that you find useful, you can always catch it on either of our blogs, either EventGuard or the Image Shop. This event is like the past sessions we've had. We hope for this to be interactive. We see some questions have started to come in, but we certainly want you to post your questions, and we also are happy to take insights that you have, because there's a ton of knowledge inside of a group like this. And we don't have all the answers. So we're certainly happy for you guys to share your insight and expertise as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. All right, so just a reminder about today's webinar, a couple of things that you can anticipate here. We're going to be talking about getting back to work, but also kind of the marketing and customer communications around what it means to reopen, so to speak. We are recording today's conversation. We're scheduled to go until 2 p.m. Eastern time. Please engage in the chat function. And as a reminder, as Rob has indicated, we're looking for your insights as well as your questions. So we're happy to take questions at any point in time. But if you have resources, links, tools, etc., to share with the group, we would love to hear and see those as well. You're welcome to take screen grabs, but Natalie will be recapping all of our major takeaways afterwards as well. And so you can grab the recording, the chat, the PowerPoint, any of the things afterwards. You can do that both at eventguard.com and theimageshop.com. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn this over to you, Rob, just to kind of remind us about what we can anticipate in terms of our agenda today. And I think in addition to some of the things that we have listed here, there will be lots of good add-ons that will just sort of weave into it as we go.
Right on. And so one, just thinking about relaunching, what does that mean? What does successfully marketing your business right now look like, and how do you communicate, and what are you communicating? Focusing on relationships. And then when we get done and any of the tidbits that we get to add in, we'll debrief, we'll do more Q&A, and then we'll wrap this thing up.
All right, so pretty straightforward. So we're going to start here with creating your relaunch plan. And so I think sort of what we collectively think, Rob, is that you need to think about relaunch and whether that means you've been working, so there are any like variety of pathways, right? You've been working remotely and you're going to continue remotely, or you've been working remotely and you're going to go back to the office, or you've been closed altogether and maybe you're going to do curbside or you're going to do carry out, or there's any number of paths, right? And so we just want you to sort of envision your pathway and kind of what you've come here focused on relative to your relaunch, and think about how the takeaways that we've outlined will specifically intersect with your pathway. I think if I journey mapped every single individual person's journey on this call, they'd probably all be slightly different, right? And so no two pathways I think are going to be the same. So just kind of at this relaunch point, think about what your journey looks like, and think about how to apply some of these tips and tricks to your own re-entry, if you will. So why don't you kind of get us started, and I'll chime in here as well.
Sure. So one thing really have been thinking about and thinking through with Medi is this idea of getting back to basics. I think, usually in a planning cycle, this is done annually, semi-annually, quarterly, looking at your target audiences, who they are and what's going on. But I think this is a really important timeline to take a hard look at your audience again and your customers and how this situation has affected them. There's, as I'd mentioned before, there's a lot of psychological impacts that have happened in this timeline, many that we still don't know the full extent to. But your customers, my customers, clients, could all be many, many things. Like they could have been sick with this. They can be afraid to be out in public. They could be on furlough or without a job or a career right now. Certainly there's a lot of restlessness and really like wondering when is the time that they can re-enter the workplace and also re-enter the service place. Some of those things in Michigan where we're at, we still don't have clear guidelines as to when you can do some of that stuff. So then thinking that and applying it to your target audience is in thing, where are they at? And what can I do to help them feel comfortable within this timeline? And I know, Aaron, you and I have talked about it a lot, but, thinking about all of these things, then putting that back in and saying, so how am I going to make this comfortable for someone to re-engage with my business?
Yeah, so a couple of things that I just want to lift up right here and right now is that I do a lot of work with associations, and the interesting thing about working with associations is that every group that I work with tries to create the largest possible target audience pool that there is. If they could say, if I ask them like, who's your target audience, and they could say everyone or the world or whatever, like they would do that. And so short of that, I'll get, we'll kind of get down into like specifics, like who are we specifically targeting? And not just, clients or members or sponsors or exhibitors or whoever it is. It's not just that, but like getting really specific about who your target audience is. And I think that this is just a good, to start with, it's a good reminder that you have to have a clear understanding of who your target audience is. Now, I'm not saying that during this time, your target audience hasn't morphed or changed, because maybe it has. And it's important to sort of acknowledge and recognize that as well. And so at this sort of step one, back to basics, it's a sort of reconnecting with your target audience and being really clear about who those people are. Trying to be as specific as possible and kind of narrowing down your target audience pool. And also recognizing that maybe you have a few more people that you need to tuck under your wing that maybe you hadn't in the past, right? And so I think part one is really this idea around the target audience and honing, refining, being as specific as possible. And then part two, to your point, is really understanding how folks have been affected and where they are at in terms of their headspace. This might mean that you should conduct a survey. It might mean that you want to conduct some informal focus groups. It might mean you want to do a formal focus group. One of our clients right now is a convention and visitors bureau that is convening actually tomorrow a small cross section of folks to ask them a series of questions about how they're doing, what they need from a destination in order to feel safe and comfortable kind of returning their event to that location. And so maybe that's the way as well. But I think really understanding your target audience and understanding what their needs, expectations, what they're feeling right now. One of the things that I've been experiencing a lot lately is that organizations are ready to return to work and to business, but their staff members are not. And they don't realize that until, they've already gotten maybe a little bit further down the pike. And so I think having those open and honest dialogues as well with staff in terms of how they're doing, what they're comfortable with, what they're not comfortable with, and having just a really good sense of what they need and want in order to be most successful right now is an important part of this equation. And I think lastly, to your point here around how can you best serve them, then it's not only knowing who your target audience is and being clear about that, knowing directly from them how they're doing and how they're feeling, like really reflecting at how you're going to serve them during this time. And when I think of our target audiences, I just want to be clear that staff is an important one to encapsulate into that conversation right now, because I think staff are going through a number of emotions and feelings and experiences based upon what they've been dealing with for the past 8-10 weeks, and how that may or may not change going forward into the summer as their traditional structures like childcare or the family unit are changing and morphing during this time.
Absolutely. Well, and how their jobs could likely change. For example, if you're in the service industry, a group that I am working on a large project, Columbia Hospitality, out of Seattle, Washington. Columbia is talking about the change to service and hospitality industry in terms of what the roles will look like for staff that are working in those environments. And so, to that point, there's potentially going to be a lot of change for folks really still on the front lines, doing the work and how they interact with customers and clients. And there's a lot of work that has to be done to help them understand that new role. And also, how do you integrate service and hospitality and for some time, maybe almost an enforcement role.
Scott mentions here in the chat as well, resources are even more strained than usual. So it's important to get the right people, and that will increase your chances of reaching your goals. One of the things that another organization that I'm aware of, and Scott, this will be right up your alley, traditionally in a membership organization, the membership equation includes both new members and renewals. However, if for some reason during this time you can't reach new members because you can't hold in-person events, or you can't, whatever the case may be, your traditional channels of gaining new members is stopped off or blocked off for some reason, that means that membership numbers need to come from somewhere else, maybe like renewals. And so maybe your traditional sort of segmentation of resources, staff resources, financial resources across kind of the ways you make and earn money might need to be rebalanced during this time because you don't have access to all of your traditional channels. And so being mindful of that, I think, is important.
Absolutely.
All right, so certainly if there are more insights, thoughts, questions that folks have in regards to this topic, please include them in the chat box, but I'm gonna keep us moving forward. And this sort of next topic, Rob, that we wanted to introduce was this idea now of like modernizing your business and potentially making changes. So I'd love to hear what this looks like kind of from your perspective, and I'll overlay a little bit meetings, events, and associations.
Sure. So maybe obviously there's been a lot of discussions at the, whether it's the Chamber of Commerce level, city DDAs, and others that have been looking at how do you do this when you know that there are customers that are going to be back and they're going to be in that place, like not much has happened, and then there's this other large percentage of people that are going to be like, yeah, I'm not so sure about this. So, and we found even through survey here in the city of Grand Rapids that a lot of retail and service-based businesses maybe aren't prepared for new systems. So I like to encourage people to look at what systems they have in place and procedures, and what are they capable of, or what can they do. So, you know, I think low hangers are, depending on the type of business you are, right? But looking at, is e-commerce a possibility for your business, and how can you implement and execute that? Is curbside service of any kind an opportunity within your business and what you do? Can you make a clean transition to cash or cashless or cardless payment systems, right? So Apple Pay and other devices, or even online, where a customer doesn't have to exchange something with an employee or yourself to do that work. And also thinking it's a really good time to look at modernization and using technology for things that maybe you've thought about doing or wanted to do as a business, but just never had the time or the energy to put into it. But to look at things that could really be helpful in growing and sustaining a business, like using a CRM, customer relationship management system, like building any kind of loyalty programming that's possible. And also, what can you do to grow reviews and feedback within your business, so that people can understand and trust that you're doing a good job, and that what your business offers is top notch. Certainly, again, in the space that I work the most in, there's also this idea that we really need to think about social distancing within the environment. Some of those things will be state ordered, a number of occupants inside of a space, footage or space between occupants within a space, and thinking about if you're a retailer, how do you configure your store so, one, you can hit the accommodation numbers that are allowable, and then how do you create enough space so that people don't end up on top of each other? I can give an example from just this weekend. I won't mention the name of the business, but I went to one of my favorite businesses here in town. I had to go and get something. Of course, I masked up. I went in. I knew what I needed. I ended up in a set of aisles that have recently been reconfigured, at least since the last time I was in, and they actually got narrower. So I suspect that the change happened before COVID, but now it's very unpleasant to be within that space, because you can literally get trapped in the middle of an aisle between people and not able to get out without almost bumping shoulders. Now that might seem like a minor thing to some, to others that will be completely unacceptable, and they may never come back after that experience. And so again, some of this stuff might not be easy, like can we move our aisles farther apart? But depending on what your business is, there's definitely opportunities to look at a layout or configuration. I'm sure within the event space, you can talk to that. And then the last thing, just in my thinking, is this idea of what's enough, like aggressive cleaning and sanitation practices. What level do you need to go to create comfort for your guests and be able to convey what you're doing that's going to help them feel like, yes, it's okay for me to come back and go into this business.
I also would say, in that sort of, I had an experience yesterday that was an interesting one. Went to the post office to drop off not many, maybe 12 large envelopes. And of course, like if I was in someone's office, I probably could have run them through the meter machine, but I'm working from home, and so I don't have that luxury. So I went to the post office, and I totally would normally just go to like, the counter and have them weigh my things and blah, blah. And I walked in and realized that there were just a significant number of people not wearing masks. And I just didn't, and I didn't really notice like many sort of like lines or cues, or I didn't really notice anything different. It's like I walked in and it was like nothing had changed. And I was just like, oh, this is how this is right now. And I actually went to the self-serve machine to sort of weigh out and figure out all of my own postage and stuff, because at least I know that I wasn't going to have to engage with anyone else. I don't know. I do wonder, like how we engage differently within venues and places, of business. Um, uh, so I don't know. I think it was an interesting reminder that if you and your organization aren't doing anything, like you're definitely not doing enough. And where's the balance between sort of maintaining operations, but also changing enough to make people feel safe and comfortable, right? So to your point, I read recently, or read this weekend, an article about some businesses opening, including a sort of white tablecloth restaurant. And in Texas right now, our restaurants are opened at 25% capacity. I think that changes this week to 50%. And the white tablecloth restaurant put down black tablecloths on all of the tables that were going to be unused. And so I think they thought to themselves, like, this is, it's a signal to folks that those are tables that aren't being used, and, to not sit at them or to not use them. And I think it was a reminder also to the staff and whatnot. And, on the surface, it sort of looks good and makes sense until you think about the fact that the white tablecloth tables are the places that people can sit, and the black tablecloth tables are the places people can't sit. And all of a sudden we have kind of what I assume to be an unconscious, choice made about where people will and won't sit. And all of a sudden you sort of have a racial topic on your hands as well. And so, so we span the spectrum from, in my experience over just the past couple of days, like organizations, venues, businesses not doing anything, to doing something that they think is good and appropriate, but maybe not running it through like channels, or thinking reflectively about, the messages that they were sending to patrons, to perhaps something that's maybe even super extreme. I don't know if you saw this, but I saw it recently where they sort of, people had these like bumpers around them, like the 6-foot bumper. I think it was like at a restaurant or a bar, and it was like a way to help people sort of navigate the restaurant or bar and not come too close to other people. And I don't know if that was real or not. It perhaps could have even been tongue in cheek, but you realize that we are spanning the spectrum in terms of our response plans right now, and we need to pay attention to how our responses are communicating to our patrons, to our members, to our attendees, because sometimes the message we're trying to convey isn't being communicated effectively. And so that was the kind of the first caveat that I wanted to make. I think the second caveat I want to make in terms of modernizing your business within the event space, I've mentioned at the top of the webinar that Michigan, actually through the Michigan Society of Association Executives, has launched what they've called a Safe Meetings in Michigan initiative, where they're engaging venues, suppliers, planners across all of the spectrum. So includes healthcare, includes hospitality, and includes newer professionals, more seasoned professionals, et cetera. And so it runs a pretty big gamut. I think at last count we're like maybe 60 to 70 professionals, maybe 45, 50 organizations involved in this program. And what we've really identified are 5 major touch points. The first touch point is pre-planning. Like, we need to think differently about how the planner is going to work with the venue in terms of pre-planning, and the types of questions you're going to ask. And for the first time in the history of our organizations, we're going to tell people not to come to some of our events, either because of their age demographic or because of their pre-existing conditions. So really thinking about it from that pre-planning standpoint, and really outlaying your go, no-go plan, and in what time frame you're going to make that plan. Now, most of our events, and certainly the advice that I'm giving to folks right now, is that if you're hosting events and you're wanting to have an in-person component, you should automatically plan a hybrid event, so that in the event your in-person event gets canceled or has to be postponed, that all of that work, time, and effort doesn't go undone, but you can host this sort of virtual event or component regardless. And so all of the things that we're working on right now, if they're not virtual first, they are being planned right now as a hybrid event. You know, I don't have, my crystal ball is no clearer or shinier than anyone else's on the webinar today. And we've all collectively heard that potentially there's going to be another wave, or potentially, you know, there's going to be a vaccine, or, I mean, who knows? I mean, nobody knows. And so I think that the safest way right now is to plan the hybrid event. Right now, we're planning our hybrid events. I kind of feel like you're planning 3 events when you plan the hybrid event, because you're planning the in-person component like you normally would. And then the hybrid event isn't really intended to just be a streaming of that in-person event, but really creating unique experiences for that virtual audience as well. And then certainly figuring out how the 2 events lay over one another. I don't know, it sort of feels like I'm planning 3 concurrent events. But what I do know about that is they've been successful both in the planning and in the execution. So if you have the right technology, I think that will work out for folks. In terms of the other touch points that we're thinking about relative to events, we're thinking about the education, how the education has to change, meaning, you know, how you're setting rooms. Are your presenters actually coming in person, or are you streaming them into that in-person audience, you know, et cetera. We're thinking about the networking and the food functions. You know, so often we set our rooms with round tables where people face one another. And unfortunately, that's the best way, the easiest way, the fastest way to contaminate not only food, but one another. So we're seeing a lot of food functions reimagined where people aren't sort of facing one another. Maybe they're set classroom style, maybe there's plexiglass, you know, maybe they're taking food back to the room, et cetera. But certainly the evolution is still unfolding as people kind of experiment with what's the right option for them. We're thinking about post-event data. I know most planners sort of run away as soon as the event is over. It's like we send out the eval, we maybe collect some feedback, maybe we make some immediate changes, or maybe we don't, but there is feedback gathered. And what we're suggesting now is that as we wrap up events, that we're really mindful of recording who was at our event, how to get in touch with them in case somebody is to become ill in the future and we need to sort of circle back to that group. Also, how many events have you hosted without anyone being ill? How many people were affected, et cetera? You know, there are some questions in the chat box about how are we going to get people to come back to meetings? And to some extent, you get people to come back to meetings by demonstrating that you can host safe meetings without people becoming ill. And so it's important, I think, to keep track of more data than usual on the back end. You might also ask people questions like, you know, did you feel safe? What could we have done to change your experience, et cetera, to sort of continuously gather that feedback and make changes. And lastly, but not least, certainly, as we think about events, often we're hosting offsite events and we have to transport people from one location to the next. And so we're thinking about things like transportation, things like, you know, outdoor spaces and how maybe they look or feel safer, or maybe they actually are in terms of not having enclosed spaces and having people so close to one another. And so, so those are really the 5 touch points that we're encouraging people to think about. Again, it's that pre-planning between planner and venue. It's how is education changing, including exhibit shows, by the way? How is networking changing, including meal functions? Post-event, what data are you collecting and sharing? And then certainly any offsite events. So I'm going to pause there. There have been actually quite a few questions popping up. So let me jump over to those, Robin. Maybe we can tag team through some of those together. And this first one was actually from Dawn. Dawn just said, wondering how to be proactive to plan for the new normal when and if in-person gatherings resume. And I think, Dawn, my advice right now in terms of being proactive, again, is to, if you're planning an in-person event, to really be mindful if there's a way to create a hybrid experience around it, so that if the in-person has to fall away, it does, and you're left with the virtual experience. But more so than that, you don't want to, I think, tell people who are in a certain age demographic or who are, have pre-existing conditions to not come without some sort of alternate option. And so I think kind of saying, perhaps coming in person isn't the best place for you during this time, but we still want to engage you in this virtual space, and to not have the virtual event feel like a redheaded stepchild, but really have it feel like an integrated component. And some of the ways that we're doing that is ensuring that there are moderators, guides, facilitators in that virtual space who are specifically paying attention to that group, and then pulling some of their comments into the in-person event, and vice versa, making sure that the in-person event is sort of integrated into that virtual space. And it does require more hands on deck than perhaps you might usually have. I need to ask a question around how do we get our clients training participants to feel comfortable re-engaging? Anita, I've been thinking about, I know you've been to a number of our in-person events as well, and I've just been thinking about not only that question, but really the experience, because, the experience in person is, you try to engage all of the senses, and one of the senses that we engage is the sense of touch, and we normally have toys and facilitation tools on tables. And I just don't think that people are going to feel comfortable around some of those things that we have previously thought about. But what I have thought about is, we have given people like pre-wrapped toys, for example. And so I would imagine that a pre-wrapped toy that somebody can sort of open themselves and then hand sanitize or wash their hands might feel more comfortable. And certainly if you're not putting it at everyone's place, but you say, if you would like one, they're over there, feel free to grab one. You can wash your hands or whatever. I think just giving people choice, I think, is important during this time, particularly during the in-person events as well. I want to take a breath here, Rob. I know that I've been talking a lot. And just checking in particular, anything else sort of stick out to you, or anything else you want to add before I keep this kind of roadshow moving forward?
Yeah, one thing that came to mind for me where the intersection can happen, and I wonder, it's a real question for me. How on say the event side, is there any thought yet about like where, when you do a hybrid event and you're having people come visit somewhere, how are their thoughts around how you're vetting cities, regions, places, and then kind of guidance on the ground for attendees? I feel like that's something just in my mind where those two come together, where it's like, hey, I came to an event, staying in town for 3 days. Where do I go?
Yeah.
When I'm not at the event, and is this a safe place for me to be?
That's a great question. So I think that a couple of things, particularly as I'm vetting not only destinations, but individual venues right now for events, I think flexibility is like my number one key, like really asking questions to figure out just how flexible venues, people are going to be is really important. I would say that, because even looking at contracts now in terms of, attrition clauses or food and beverage minimums or cancellations or whatever it is, I'm looking for the places that are going to work with me and be the most flexible. I think so. That's like number one. I also think in terms of planning larger events, finding places that have good outdoor space. I'm converting an in-person event to a hybrid event right now for an association, and the venue itself has slim to none outdoor space. And, you know, outdoor space is sort of one right now of the magic, the secret magic bullets, right? In terms of like, if you have outdoor space, at least one of the receptions or maybe a meal function can go outside. Like, people are generally feeling more safe and comfortable outside than they have in the past. Or certainly as more safe than you would think about coming to an in-person event that's maybe within the confines of a venue. And so I think kind of looking for outdoor space is also important. But to your original question about, you know, what to do when I'm in a destination, I think working closely with the Convention and Visitors Bureau, working closely with the Chamber of Commerce, these are ways I think to figure out kind of who's open, what their practices are and look like. To some extent, they're a vetted list, if you will, of key considerations. And so I don't know, I would say that working with not only the venue, but the CVB and the Chamber of Commerce, I think you could identify, you know, a good walking distance list of venues, businesses that might be good downtime activities to do when people aren't engaged, so that people aren't kind of just hanging out in their hotel room, but maybe are able to get out and experience the local community.
Right on. No, I mean, I think that's great.
Just another comment here and I'll move on. I'm going to try to get through all of these as we go, but Dawn said, challenging to take a full day event to a 2-hour online event, especially if money and CEUs are involved. The answer to that, Dawn, is 100%. Like, that's not possible. And the people that are trying to take a full day event to a 2-hour online, or taking a full day event to a full day online, like, that's just not feasible. That's just, you know, no one can sit at their computer for 8 hours and participate and feel fully engaged in an event. And so I think in particular, being conscious of pricing, being conscious of continuing education credit, being conscious of creative ways to offer not only a mix of live programming. So what we're experiencing a lot right now is a mix of live. So some content being delivered live, but also some content being recorded, and not doing all one or the other, but offering a good mix of both. Because I think giving people choice to kind of go look at some content during their downtime at a time that works for them, maybe it's late at night or early in the morning or whenever, I think is a good option. So thinking critically about what content is best delivered in what format, and then kind of divvying up content perhaps in a new way that you haven't experienced or done before. Let's catch up. And actually, for one of the state societies, we have been able to offer the same amount of credits that they would normally offer in person to the at-home audience, and that's just because we've extended or expanded the time frame. So instead of, you know, we'll have the 2 days of the main conference, but there's also education going to be delivered both live and recorded before and after. And so we've sort of just spread it out a little bit longer so that people, which actually is better in the long run anyway. Who can sit down over 2 days and sort of sink in 12 hours of education and feel like they've actually processed it and applied it appropriately? But in this way of sort of spreading it out a little bit, keeping it as a unit, as a conference, but sort of spreading it out over several weeks, if not a month, means that they have opportunities to sort of take in little bits of information over the course of that time, begin to apply it, begin to struggle and wrestle with it, and then you have the opportunity to sort of help them along that journey. Oftentimes, that post support we can't provide because the conference is over and done and they're not coming back to us for support. They're not coming back to ask us questions. But in this way, we can actually work in some of that good benefit over the long run. So anyway, I choose to see it as an opportunity. So with that, why don't you talk a little bit about this overcommit, and then we'll move on to the actual marketing aspects.
Absolutely. You know, a big thing is that, you know, when we're thinking about this, there's all these ideas and all this some of it's new requirement. You're going to have to do it. Some of it's a choice based on who your audience is and what they need from you. But taking on too much at once and then not being able to fulfill it is probably worse than not, because your customers are going to be looking at what you're saying and what your actions are, and do they meet up more now than maybe they ever have. We know from survey consumers, their perspectives are changing, how they feel about things are changing, what they want to see from business is changing. And so I think, again, you really just have to think like, what can I really commit to? And then what can I tell people? And I do believe it's really important to tell people what you're doing and what you can commit to for them. Obviously, you got to stay true to who you are in that, and have a thought with how this works for your mission, your vision, and your values. How are you going to take feedback from people? Again, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, as feedback is something to market, but feedback's also something to take in this timeline and not to be offended. I can tell you that working with several businesses that were considered essential here in Michigan through this, consumers were acting out in the essential environment pretty frequently. Maybe behavior that you wouldn't expect out of customers, but frustrated, upset, angry. Small things might set somebody off, and the truth is it's all different for them. So how are you going to collect feedback? How are you going to convey that? How are you going to work with your team to improve? And also, how are you going to, handle that personally as a business owner and respond to people when these things happen? Because they probably are going to happen. People are going to be upset about things. Some people, again, are going to say, I shouldn't have to do anything you want me to do in a location. And some people are going to do everything you ask them to do. So you really need to think about that, and then how you're expressing those messages out. And this last point, remember that today's normal may not be tomorrow's normal. This stuff's fluid. Things are changing every day, every week, every month. We got a kind of a bombshell release in Michigan yesterday where they know, and nobody knew. I had one of our clients was in a similar working group that you're on, Aaron, inside of the restaurant industry. And they were on a 60-person call, broken out into groups. And then the call ended because they're like, we got to get to Lansing, major announcement getting ready to happen. And nobody knew what it was. And by 2:00 it was, we're reopening restaurants and service and retail, or restaurant and retail, I think, in Northern Michigan, UP in Northern Michigan.
Mm-hmm. I heard that.
Nobody saw that coming, as far as we know. And I mean, we have people that are very, very high up within the Michigan Restaurant Association and the National Restaurant Association. Most of them probably didn't find out until the last little bit before that decision was made. So things can happen fast, and you really need to be able to be fluid with that, and then also still understand what your standards are and what you convey to your customers. Those are yours. If they follow the guidelines, and that's what makes you comfortable, and that's what makes your customers comfortable, you don't have to just change because a standard changed. You're probably going to want to think about it, because obviously there's a lot of impacts on revenue by square footage, but you don't just have to jump. And your customers are going to watch, and you'll be the one that knows who they are and what they expect. So when the time to jump is right, you can make that decision.
Awesome. Just two quick things that I wanted to lift up. First, for those asking questions around safe meetings, there will specifically be a 2-day virtual event around safe meetings and the outcomes of that project. And folks can learn more about that at msae.org. All of the resources that they are developing will be free of charge. And then they are hosting this sort of 2-day paid event that it's drilling down very specifically into all of the key findings. And so if folks are interested in that, they can learn more at that website. The second thing that I want to say in this don't overcommit slide is that and it sounds like a number of my colleagues on the call today are experiencing this as well, Scott and Dawn and others. When I'm asking folks, well, it looks like your in-person event had an exhibit show. Is it important to have an exhibit show in your online event or experience? And they say yes. And then I sort of go down the list, one to the next, the next, the next, and every answer is yes. And so column A and column B are essentially the same. but the time to deliver them is, maybe a fourth of the time. So instead of an 8-hour day, maybe I have a 2-hour day or whatever it is. And we can't just shoehorn and cram all of the same products into a smaller space. And so being mindful that that's the point of conversation, of saying, okay, well, what is really most important here? What are you really trying to achieve? You're not going to probably earn the same revenue. You're probably not going to have the same registration. Like, there are going to be other things that are going to change as well. And so assuming that, or planning, or trying to sort of pin down any one of these things and assume they're going to be the same, I think is probably the wrong approach. And it sounds like a number of folks on this call understand that already, and maybe they're working with other people who don't. And so it's really thinking about, how are you going to help people recognize that they can't have all of the same things that they had previously, and something's got to give, something's going to have to go. So certainly a lot in terms of the reopening plan itself, but also I know we want to touch a little bit on marketing, and certainly this is the Image Shop's expertise around marketing and branding. And so let's click through a couple of these slides. This likely won't be a surprise to people, but probably will be good reminders.
Yeah, right on. I mean, and we've been saying this throughout this series, and I know everybody hasn't been on these, but we're still advising that transparency is so important. Again, I mentioned it before. Make sure that you look at how you're telling people about what changes are happening in your business, or how they're able to participate with your business. If you have a relaunch plan, or you build one, be able to share that with people. Discuss what your phase approaches look like. Show them. There's certainly an opportunity to create images, videos, how things might work. As an example, how does curbside work? How does pickup work? How does a virtual event work? We're all doing this. It doesn't mean everybody is, or that they know the limits, or they know what's best. Definitely focus and be brand focused while you're communicating. Does your voice need tweaking based on the current climate? Some businesses I've seen, their models have changed completely to react to this situation, and it's driving a little bit of voice narrative change because it's had to. And then finally, Aaron used the example before about the tablecloths, but choose your words and your images and your practices wisely. It's very easy to make major mistakes because you just didn't think of all the variables. That means sometimes adding more people into the thought process. Don't rely just on yourself as the only angle. Talk to your employees, talk to vendors. There's lots of experts within your circles, and take advantage of that. Thinking again about your website, things that you need to think about changing. Are there any changes to where you are, what your hours of operations are, what you have to offer? Post any of those tutorials you make that you use for social, bring them back over to your website. I'm advising people to have a permanent, depending on their business, a permanent COVID response page if it's applicable. Something that for the foreseeable future, somebody can go look to and look at your plan of action, your practices, why they should trust to come to your business. I think that's a real valuable note to have. That doesn't mean you're going to have hundreds and hundreds of people checking it out, but remember, for the ones that it matters to, it will matter and they will care about it. And then finally, how can people get in touch with you if they have a question about that? If you're dealing directly with consumers, anything that's in real time or gets as close to real time as it can be is a value add.
The one thing I want to lift up here that I think is that I just really appreciate, I think hearing this idea of the relevant videos, I think is new. Like, we've been talking about photos for a long time. Like, what are you doing? What is the process? What does it look like? I think the idea of the videos for me was new, Rob, from you, and I really appreciated that. One of the things that we've been doing with our events as well, to a number of your folks' questions from earlier around how do we get people to feel comfortable. I think part of it is helping people understand what to expect. And so whether it's an in-person event, virtual event, or hybrid event of any substance, we've sort of been creating virtual, what we call like a virtual wraparound, where we will have some sort of virtual touch point beforehand and afterwards. And what that's really intended to be, particularly beforehand, is to help people know what to expect. expect. So we're telling them the expectation is that you wear a mask, or here's where we're going to, you know, offer hand sanitizer stations, or, you know, when you come to the elevator banks, there's going to be also stair options. You'll see these signs throughout. This is what they mean. You know, here's what the you know, if you feel ill, this is the place you're going to go to, and show them what that looks like or whatever. And just kind of I think being orientative, I don't know if that's a word, but it's orienting people, I think, appropriately to the space. You know, we started the call thinking about people's our personas and what they're experiencing, how they're feeling right now. And I think part of it is also realizing that anxiety is running likely at an all-time high for a number of folks. And any way to sort of reduce anxiety, concern, doubt, before people make their way to your actual venue, whether it's your business or you're going to a meeting or event, I think will help a number of folks be better prepared to engage with you on site. And so I love the idea of the videos, but also in some instances, maybe having these like pre-event or pre-meeting calls or orientations where you can also go deeper into some of those things as opposed to a 1 or 2 minute video, I think is helpful as well.
So, and I know we're running out of time, but quickly, when we look at what advertising opportunities are, there's still lots of opportunity within search, whether it's Google, social. I can tell you right now, we're seeing lots of industries where traffic is way down. And so there might not even be audiences large enough to go after what you want. But that also means as it comes back, there may be real buying opportunities that exist because of the way that market works. So you want to keep an eye on that. Certainly some message opportunities or things that you can tell people about what your process and procedures are. You know, again, what world do you reside in? Takeout, curbside, virtual appointments. All these things can be conveyed through the right campaign, landing pages, and other tactics. Certainly new service or products that you're offering or that you want to lift. It's a great opportunity to do that. Look at what your search terms are. If you do pay-per-click and AdWord type advertising, focused on that target audience, and lift up those new ideas to folks, like this example being wine delivery or wine delivery near me. You can lift that up and bring that out for folks because they are now starting to look for these new topics. You know, I know I'm not gonna go to the store, but will somebody bring that to me as a real opportunity?
I think lastly, we just remember that relationships are so important, right? They've always been important. Sometimes in our organizations and our businesses, our associations, we can slip into a much more transactional approach, but remembering that, that it's all about relationships, it's all about collaboration and teamwork and partnership. And really being mindful about how you can grow and support relationships, particularly when we integrate the use of technology and how we can, you know, it's been interesting. One of the things that I've started is during this time, the number of people that have wanted to meet with me, even for a sort of short amount of time, has increased exponentially. Someone just has a question, they want to pick my brain, they want to whatever. And so, you know, I created this, I leveraged Calendly, sort of a technology platform for calendar appointments, to sort of ease some of the burden of having to set up these like short appointments to talk with people. And I think it's just kind of an important reminder that technology can help. We have to look for the opportunities, the places to integrate it into our life to make things more easier, not only during this time, but also into the future as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So with that, I know it's kind of, we've certainly wound down time-wise. I think we hit on the questions that came through the chat. If certainly there are any other questions that you all have for me or for Rob, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can find us both at theimageshop.com and eventguard.com. I know that this was sort of a smorgasbord, if you will, thinking about both reopening and marketing. But if there are any specific deep dive questions that you have or want to explore more fully with us, don't hesitate to reach out. And of course, the recaps will be available here shortly for folks to take advantage of. Rob, any other sort of concluding thoughts that you'd like to share before we log off for today?
Nope, just appreciate everybody's time. Hopefully we're helpful, and have a great day.
Well, and just know that we're all in this together, and we're all sort of navigating, thinking through some of these same questions and concerns. And so if there's any way we can help plug you into the right networks to gain access to the very specific details around any of these topics, we would be happy to do that. But with that, thanks again for joining us today. We hope you have a great day, a great week, and a great Memorial Day weekend, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everyone.